All right, how your estate plan can prevent litigation. So I'm sure, not everybody, most people have heard horror stories about family fighting after, mom, dad, somebody passed away, and it just ripped the family apart. Ideally, your estate plan avoids any sort of litigation that drags on for years and years and years and just really destroys the family, right? Most people, I think, would want their passing to actually work as a way to bring the family closer together, not tear the family apart. And so there's three areas that I think should be addressed in your estate plan to avoid any sort of litigation, or at least minimize it to some extent. The first is incapacity planning. And this is, a lot of people don't think about this, right? But most people think about estate planning, they think about death. What happens when I die? But what about while you're still alive? What happens if you get Alzheimer's, dementia, you're in an accident, you're incapacitated? What then? Who's going to take care of you? Who's going to pay your bills? Who's going to manage your finances? Who's going to sell real estate if you can't take care of it anymore? Assist you when you're moving into a nursing home or something like that. And that's where we see a lot of fighting because there was no planning in place. You didn't spell out who you wanted to make medical decisions on your behalf. You had a old power of attorney or no power of attorney, or one that didn't address all of your concerns. Who can manage your affairs? And if you don't have any of that type of stuff in place, it could mean that you're going to guardianship court, and the court is going to name a court-appointed guardian, which is a whole nightmare for most people. It's very expensive, and there can be very litigious, people fighting over who's going to become your legal guardian. Or maybe someone stealing money because you didn't give the powers to somebody, and so now you're getting taken advantage of. So the first area to try to avoid any sort of litigation is while you're still alive, and make sure you have proper planning to protect in the case of incapacity. The second is probate litigation, and this is where we see a whole host of fighting. So this is after you've died, and either you had no estate plan in place or you only had a will. Okay, so you had no plan in place, which is a lot of people, and the other percentage of people typically, if they did any sort of a plan, they did a will. And now you've got fighting in probate court because they're fighting over the will. Maybe it wasn't drafted correctly. Maybe it wasn't executed correctly. It didn't have witnesses on it. It wasn't signed properly. Maybe one of the beneficiaries was left out. Maybe there's not proper language in it. Maybe there's now creditor. There's a whole host of stuff. When you have probate, it's open to the public. Anybody can see what's going on. And it just it leaves a ton of room for siblings, for kids, for creditors to come in there and fight. So ideally, the solution to that is don't go to probate. Don't only have a will in place. Make sure all of your assets are titled properly so that you don't have to go to probate. And that's really easy to avoid, right? Probate is, in theory, very easy to avoid. I say in theory, but in practice, it's really simple. It doesn't take a whole lot of work, doesn't take a whole lot of money, but probate itself can take a lot of money and is a lot of work. So probate litigation, make sure your estate plan covers that so that you're not going to probate. Well, if you're not going to probate, probably you set up a trust. So the third area is potentially trust litigation. Now, where we see this again, people fighting, is improperly drafted trusts. Maybe they weren't very clear about who gets what. Maybe the language was very poor, which again, hopefully if you're doing your trust, you're not using a do-it-yourself form. You're not going to LegalZoom. You're not using your real estate attorney who does a little bit of estate planning on the side. Hopefully you're using an expert, someone who specializes in estate planning. Not to say that they're all going to be perfect, but you're not going to your pediatrician for heart surgery. Same principle here. You're not going to your divorce attorney to prepare your estate plan. You want a specialist in that area. So that should hopefully alleviate a lot of the stuff. Make sure your assets are getting transferred into the trust so that the trust actually functions, it actually works. like it's intended to work. You might want to consider having what's called a no contest clause in your trust, which basically says, look, if I named you as a beneficiary and I want you to get $25,000, that's what you're getting. And if you challenge my trust because you think you should be getting $200,000 and you lose, you don't get that $25,000. So you can put some language in there that really says, you know what, because sometimes people just want to fight. And they think that, hey, maybe if I just kind of like throw a bomb in here and see what happens, I'll get more money out of it. Well, having a no contest clause in there basically would hopefully deter them, because they're not going to just bring some sort of frivolous lawsuit because they realize if they lose, they're not going to get anything. So that might be something. And then lastly on this point is where we see a lot of litigation, sometimes, not a lot, but sometimes litigation is where the person you've named as the trustee, the person that you've named in charge of managing everything and making the distributions, maybe they're not doing their job correctly. Maybe they're stealing money. Maybe they're doing things they shouldn't have, or maybe they're just doing a poor job. They're too busy. They're not providing the other beneficiaries with accountings. So when you're picking your trustee, you just want to be very cautious and pick somebody that you trust, that they want to do the job, that they're responsible, and you shouldn't have any sort of that issue. So 3 areas that you want to try to avoid. Make sure you bring up those issues with your estate planning attorney when you're doing your estate plan. No litigation around incapacity, no probate litigation, and hopefully no trust litigation as well.